voice when you preach?
Well, something like that.
Among other things. You were the Martin Luther King Jr. chair in 1966, Colgate. King was still living, then he dies 2 years later. Where were you when he died? What was that time like for you as a prophetic preacher? Because I do think of you as a prophetic preacher. What was going on for you in that time?
Well, I don't want to tell you what was going on in any great detail. The truth is that when Martin Luther King was at his best, he was resented by a majority of African American people. It's a terrible truth. The president of the National Baptist Convention unseated him from the presidency of the Congress because he was not his candidate. And when it was put to a vote, the people were all with King, but Jackson. And so Jackson unseated him and put his own appointee in there with authority that I never knew existed. I certainly didn't know he had it, but he got away with it, and it was a tragedy of all kinds of things because up to that point, Martin's father and J.H. Jackson had been just like that. But I had mixed feelings about the whole thing because I had him come to the church, the town where I was pastor, and there were people who didn't want that to happen, and there were people who held him in a kind of, what should I call it? And they had him come, they raised money, and then they kept the money. I was at the home of a dear friend of mine, Dr. Shaw, who was president of the convention, and heard him arguing with the fellows that helped him to sponsor the mass meeting because they were not going to turn the money over. When I had a mass meeting in my town, they called me up to urge me to send the money. I said, well, that's all we got. We're a small town. But if any more comes in, you will surely get it. I would not keep a penny of it. But it was that sort of thing that caused me to be less than delighted about the King era because it was a mixed blessing.
Right. That's actually why I'm asking you the question, because you were living in it, and I know that, I mean, my own sense of not just the time, I was a young girl at the time, and I remember, there are things I remember, but I think that what I see written don't often reflect sort of this part of the story in ways that are faithful to just how chaotic it was, and just how contentious even his being elevated as, quote, the voice was among African American church leaders.
I was in the lobby of a hotel in Kenya for the World Alliance, Baptist World Alliance, and Dr. Jackson, the president of the National Baptist Convention, was sitting in the lobby and went to sleep. He didn't have his gang with him. He was just sitting there. Well, several of us had gotten together. Whenever you see him sleeping, go and wake him up and keep him going in conversation because we can't have our president of these millions of Baptist people sitting up in the lobby sleep. So I proceeded to fulfill my promise. And I got to tell him, ask me anything. So he made a mistake there. Why did you change the address of your church from Michigan Boulevard to 31st Street? Because the mayor was going to change the name of the street from Boulevard to King. And he refused to have King as an address on his letterhead.
Wow.
Can you imagine that?
I can't, but I believe you.
When I challenged him about it, and I said, and you moved him out of the presidency, that nobody had ever done that. He said, but he was so insubordinate. And the fellas wouldn't let me leave him there. Well, he lied. But
this is a joy of talking to somebody in their 90s. They ain't got nothing to lose. They will tell us the truth. Let me, Brandon, are you gonna do questions with us? If you have a particular question you want to ask, so Brandon's gonna gather those questions and he's gonna pass out some note cards. Because I don't want you pontificating, I'm gonna actually ask your question. And what I mean by I don't want you pontificating is I know I'm in a room with a bunch of preachers and future preachers and wannabe preachers and wish they were preachers. And the question might come at the end of a 5-minute speech. And I'm trying to avoid that. So Brandon's going to pass out cards. I appreciate that part of the history. I really do. I want to go back to you as the professor. I was in a conversation with Dr. Fleming, who's here at Columbia Theological. And we were talking about just the impact people have on our scholarship. And you had, and continue to have, such a profound impact on the way in which people who are thinking about preaching on a sort of professional level, not just I'm pastoring a church, which is important. I'm not making that distinction, but those of us who are teaching preachers, your thinking about preaching has had a profound impact on us. I wonder how you got to teaching preaching. How did you become a teacher of preachers?
I wish I knew. I swore and be doggone that I wasn't going to be no preacher because both of my grandfathers was named Henry. And named me Henry after both of them. Both of them were Baptist preachers. One had 3rd grade education and one was a graduate of Lincoln University. But both of them had been originally named William Henry after the hero president. And both of them had dropped to William, and I was maybe 12 years old when they first met. But my 2 grandfathers were preachers, and the name was Henry. And then my mother or father, I can't remember when they did it or how they did it, but I used to be able to just recite all kinds of verses. When I did my first funeral, I walked down the aisle leading, let not your heart be troubled, you believe in God, believe also in me, in my Father's house. I'm just reciting this thing now, looking at my book, and you would have thought I had done 400 funerals. That was my first funeral. But I could recite that 14th chapter of John when I couldn't read, when I was 5 years old.
Because you've been around here preaching.
So I don't know when I...
Okay, silence the phone, folks.
So in my book that just went to press, I tell the story of when I was actually called. It seems that this gentleman named Jack had an automobile accident. He almost died. And my father did a lot of things to help him and his wife keep their home going. So he was the boss at a farm implement company. So when I finished high school, January 1937, my dad walked over to Jack and said, this boy is coming out of high school. Is there any possible chance that you'd have a job for him? He said, I don't have a job anywhere, but for your son, I'll make a job. Now, as a result of this job, he had to justify hiring at the going wage of 25 cents an hour a kid only 110 pounds, 112 pounds, on a job where he had to handle freight, he had to do all kinds of crazy things. So he hired me. And in order to cover for what he did in gratitude to my father, he would send me to, if he had nothing for me to do, he didn't dare let the boss folk see me loafing. So he sent me up in the warehouse and put me to assembling equipment which had been shipped in, broken down, and all I did all day long, sometimes, was to push ratchet wrench. We didn't have power wrenches in those days. This was 1937. So I noticed one day that it took no thinking and my mind would float all over the place. It's called free association. And I noticed that while I had studied Spanish and I planned to be an engineer, I was going to do it. I was going out there and come back rich. Porque I could really speak Spanish. Estudiaba lengua española para trabajar con ingenieros eléctricos. So, I had that stuff down pat. But it dawned on me that if I was going to be an engineer in South America, I sure wasn't dreaming about it. In fact, I never once floated in my association to South America. I had a good accent, I could fool people. They looked at me and thought I was Spanish and all that. But it dawned on me one day that somebody's trying to tell me something.
So when you free associated, where did you float off to?
That's the problem. I was either in a mission in Africa or in a pulpit or something. Every time my mind was cut loose, here comes this, and I ain't sent for it. Finally, I decided the Lord started telling me something, and once I decided that God was calling me, I yielded, and it was like somebody had lifted a load off of my back.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that. I won't tell my story, but I understand that. The lifting of the load thing.
Yeah, well, it was, and I've never regretted it. I've worked on salaries that will make you cry, telling you how low my salary was, but I've never regretted it.
If you had one, the questions are coming around. If you had one thing before they start asking their questions that you wanted young is a relative term here, young preachers to think about as they are answering their call, what would that be?
Well, it would be simply this, that you be sure you're looking for, trying to find what God is telling you to do. Because